Hi, I'm Rowella. 2 months ago, I found myself on my knees in front of my fiancé's wealthy parents, begging for $150,000 to save my mother's life. They looked at me like I was dirt. And then he, the man I thought I'd marry, said, "I'm not a bank. Don't call me again." I walked out of their mansion into the freezing rain, humiliated, heartbroken, and certain my world had just ended. But that night, on a dark street corner, I helped a stranger, and what happened after would flip my life upside down in ways I never could have imagined. Before we dive in, let me ask you, what time are you listening to this, and where are you? Drop a comment below. I read every single one. The rain had started as a drizzle, but quickly became something relentless, soaking through my blouse and weighing me down as if it knew I didn't belong in this neighborhood. Des Moines felt different here. The streets were too clean, the houses too large, the air too quiet. My shoes squished with every step, but I didn't care. My mother's face kept flashing in my mind, pale, exhausted, holding my hand the way she used to when I was little. That $150,000 surgery wasn't a want. It was survival. I whispered to myself, tonight has to change everything. Hours earlier, I had been in front of my mirror, trying to make myself look like I belonged in his world. Dorian had told me this dinner was a formality. "My family will adore you," he'd said, smiling in that charming way that made me ignore all my doubts. I'd fallen for him fast. His confidence, his promises, the way he made me believe I was finally stepping out of my small life. I'd chosen my outfit carefully, but the thing that mattered most was the scarf around my neck. It was my late father's last gift to my mother, and when she let me wear it tonight, it felt like armor. Soft, faded, and powerful in ways only I could understand. The Callahan mansion wasn't a house. It was a statement. The kind that whispered, "You will never truly belong here." The long driveway gleamed, lined with perfect hedges. I saw my reflection in the polished front doors before the butler let me in. Chandeliers sparkled above me, the floors so pristine I hesitated to step on them. And then there she was, Celeste Callahan. She took one look at me and smiled, the kind of smile that cuts before it warms. "Oh, quaint," she said, her eyes landing on my scarf. "Is that vintage?" I swallowed hard, forcing a polite smile. It belonged to my mother. Her eyebrow lifted just slightly, as if I'd confirmed what she suspected. I was an outsider playing dress-up. Dinner began with small talk, though it felt more like an interview I hadn't been invited to. "Where did you study?" Celeste asked, her tone so casual it almost hid the judgment. "I went to a vocational school," I said. "Ah," she replied, glancing at Dorian. "And tailoring? That's nice. Do you own your home?" Each question was a needle, sharp and precise, and Dorian, my fiancé, the man who said he loved me, said nothing. He didn't defend me. He didn't even meet my eyes. At some point, I couldn't hold it in anymore. My mother's condition, the hospital calls, the bills piling up, it all came rushing out. My voice broke as I explained everything, tears spilling before I could stop them. I dropped to my knees, hands clasped like a child begging for mercy. "Please," I said. "I need your help. $150,000 for my mother's surgery. I wouldn't ask if it weren't life or death." Celeste smirked, her fork clinking against her plate as she set it down. "You expect us to bankroll your problems? How uncouth." I looked to Dorian, searching for the man who'd promised me we were a team. Instead, I saw someone cold, someone I didn't recognize. He leaned back in his chair and said, without even flinching, "I'm not a bank. Don't call me again." The room went silent. It wasn't just humiliation, it was erasure. I don't remember how I left. I just remember the rain hitting me like punishment, washing away my makeup, turning my scarf into a wet rope around my neck. I walked until my legs ached, my engagement ring heavy on my finger like it belonged to someone else. And then I saw her, a frail, elderly woman at the bus stop, clutching a tattered bag, shaking in the cold. That's when I saw her. A frail, elderly woman standing by the bus stop, clutching a tattered canvas bag and trembling in the cold. Her thin coat barely shielded her from the rain, and she leaned heavily on the metal post as if it was the only thing keeping her upright. I hesitated at first, unsure if I had the energy to deal with anyone else tonight, but something about the way she hugged that bag, like it was all she had left, kept my feet moving toward her. The bus stop bench was slick with rain, so I didn't bother sitting. I just stood there, dripping, scarf plastered against my skin, feeling like one of those forgotten statues you sometimes see in old city parks. People in expensive cars drove past without slowing down. They didn't see me. Or maybe they saw exactly what I was, someone who didn't belong, someone invisible. When the bus finally pulled up, the woman stepped forward first. She looked so small standing in front of that driver, her voice barely audible over the rain. "Please, I need to get to Mercy General. My grandson. He had an accident," she said, gripping her bag tighter. The driver didn't even blink. "Ma'am, fare's $2. No exceptions," he said flatly, his hand resting on the ticket machine like it was a line he'd drawn between compassion and policy. She fumbled through her bag, pulling out a few coins that barely added up to $1. "I can pay the rest later. I just need to see him." "Rules are rules," he replied. And for a second, I wanted to scream at him, at the world, at all of it. Instead, I stepped forward and handed him a $5. "For both of us," I said quietly. The woman's eyes widened as she turned to me. "I don't know how to repay you," she whispered, her voice cracking. "You don't have to," I said, brushing past her gently to get on the bus. We sat side by side, the hum of the engine filling the silence. For a while, neither of us spoke. I stared out the window, watching the raindrops smear the city lights into blurs of gold and red. My mind replayed dinner at the Callahans like some cruel loop I couldn't escape. Celeste's smirk, Dorian's words cutting sharper than any blade. After a few minutes, the woman broke the silence. "That scarf," she said softly. "It looks loved. Someone important gave it to you, didn't they?" I froze, fingers brushing against the fabric instinctively. "It was my mother's," I said after a pause. "She gave it to me. To remind me to be strong." The woman smiled faintly, like she understood more than I'd said. "It suits you. You wear it like armor." Her words surprised me. No one had ever described it that way. She shifted slightly, leaning back against the seat. "My name's Jeanette. My husband passed years ago. My grandson. He's all I have left. Fell off a ladder this afternoon. They say it's serious." "I'm sorry," I said, and I meant it. "I hope he's okay." She nodded slowly, staring ahead. "Life doesn't ask if we're ready for what it throws at us. We just get through it. Somehow." Her words settled in me like a seed. Maybe that was what I needed to hear. "Why do you look like someone who's lost more than just a dinner?" she asked gently. It wasn't prying. It was the kind of question only someone who had survived their own storms could ask. So I told her. I told her about my mom's heart condition, the $150,000 surgery, the way I begged for help on my knees. I told her about Dorian's silence, his words that shattered everything I thought I knew about us. Jeanette listened, really listened, without interrupting or offering hollow platitudes. When I finished, she simply said, "Some people confuse wealth with worth. Don't let them define yours." Her eyes lingered on my scarf again. "That's not shame you're wearing. That's strength. Something about the way she said it, like she believed it before I could, made the scarf feel lighter around my neck. When the bus pulled up to Mercy General, she stood, then turned back to me. "Sweetheart," she said softly, "I'll remember this. People like you, you're rare." I watched her walk toward the hospital entrance, the rain still falling but somehow feeling less harsh than before. As the bus pulled away, I realized I was breathing easier, even if my problems hadn't changed. I didn't know then that this small act, this stranger, would rewrite everything I thought I knew about hope. 2 days later, my phone rang. It wasn't Dorian. It wasn't anyone I expected. I had spent those 2 days in a kind of fog, moving from one corner of my apartment to the other, as if rearranging myself could rearrange my life. The kitchen counter had become an altar to everything I couldn't fix. A pile of unpaid bills, hospital estimates, and a half-empty coffee mug that had gone cold hours before. The little light that managed to creep through the window felt more like an intruder than a comfort, catching on the dust I hadn't cared enough to clean. I kept dialing charities, hoping for a miracle, for someone on the other end to say, "Yes, we can help." Most calls went to voicemail. A few ended with polite apologies. And every time I hung up, I opened my bank app, staring at numbers that barely added up to hope. I'd never felt so small, so powerless, like life had pushed me to my knees and forgotten I was there. When the phone rang that afternoon, my first thought was that it was another rejection. Or worse, a debt collector. I almost didn't answer. But something in me couldn't stand the silence anymore. "Hello?" My voice cracked, raw from disuse. "Rowella?" A calm male voice, unfamiliar yet strangely grounded, spoke on the other end. "This is Benjamin Miller, Jeanette's grandson." For a moment, my breath caught. "Ben, is everything okay? Did something happen to Jeanette?" My chest tightened as I waited for his reply, my mind racing through every possible bad scenario. "She's fine," he said quickly, as though sensing my fear. "She told me what you did for her, paying her bus fare, staying with her that night. She doesn't forget kindness. Neither do I." Relief washed over me, followed by confusion. "You didn't have to call," I said softly, defensive without meaning to be. I wasn't looking for gratitude." "This isn't gratitude," he replied, his tone steady but gentle. "It's appreciation, and maybe an offer." His words hung in the air, suspended between us. I sat down at my small kitchen table, clutching the phone like it could vanish if I blinked. "An offer?" "She told me about you," Ben continued. "About your mother, the surgery, the dinner where those people humiliated you." There was a pause, the kind that carries weight. I wanted to help. I almost laughed, not out of humor but disbelief. "You don't even know me." "Sometimes knowing someone's pain is enough," he said simply. "I run a tech consultancy. I've been fortunate, successful, I guess, and I want to cover your mother's medical expenses." My grip on the phone slipped, and I nearly dropped it onto the floor. "You... what?" "I'll pay for the surgery. All of it," Ben said. "No conditions, no strings attached." The words barely made sense. I pressed my free hand against my forehead, willing myself to understand. "That's $150,000, I whispered, my voice shaking. "I know," he replied, "and I know what that kind of money can mean when it stands between someone and the person they love most." Tears burned my eyes before I could stop them. I hadn't cried in those 2 days, but now they came uninvited, slipping down my cheeks as I pressed my sleeve against them. "I can't accept that. I can't just take charity." "Then don't," Ben said softly, not missing a beat. "Think of it as an investment. In your mother's life, in you. You helped my grandmother when you didn't have to. Let me do the same for you." My pride flared, even through the desperation. "You don't owe me anything, and Rowella." His voice cut through mine, not harsh but firm. She told me you're rare, and I believe her. I couldn't speak. I wanted to argue, to tell him no, to insist I'd find another way, but I couldn't ignore the truth. I didn't have another way. Finally, I exhaled a breath I didn't know I was holding. If you're really serious, if this isn't some kind of— I'm serious, he said. I'll wire the funds directly to Mercy General. That way you don't have to handle any of it. I closed my eyes, letting the words sink in. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe without a weight crushing my chest. I don't know what to say, I whispered. You don't have to say anything, Ben replied. Just let them take care of your mom, and when she's better, you can decide what comes next for you. His parting words stayed with me long after the call ended. This isn't the end of your story, Rowella. It's the beginning. I sat there, phone still in my hand, staring at nothing as the reality of it hit me. For the first time in weeks, I let myself believe my mom might live. But I didn't know what this decision would set in motion. The next morning, I walked into Mercy General, not as a beggar, but as a daughter ready to fight for her mother. The air inside the hospital was thick with the familiar scent of disinfectant and coffee that had been sitting too long in a pot. My shoes squeaked against the linoleum floors as I made my way toward my mother's room, each step heavy but purposeful. I had barely slept the night before, but I felt steadier than I had in weeks. When I entered, she was still asleep, her frail frame lost beneath the hospital blanket. Machines hummed quietly, keeping track of the life I couldn't afford to lose. I sat by her side, taking her cool hand in mine, rubbing my thumb over the bones that jutted out like delicate branches. We're going to get through this, I whispered, my voice cracking in spite of my best effort to stay calm. I promise you, Mom. I noticed the scarf, my father's last gift to her, had slipped off her shoulders during the night. I gently wrapped it back around her, smoothing the edges like I could somehow shield her from everything that had brought us to this point. That scarf had been with us through every storm. It wasn't just fabric anymore. It was a reminder of where we came from, and that we'd survived worse than this. I was lost in that thought when I heard footsteps. Slow at first, then more deliberate. My stomach knotted as I turned toward the doorway, and there they were, Dorian and his parents. For a moment, I thought I was hallucinating, but no. Their perfectly pressed coats, smug expressions, and Dorian's familiar slouch were unmistakable. The Callahans. In my mother's hospital room, they didn't belong here, not in this sacred space. Well, Celeste Callahan's voice cut through the quiet like a knife, her heels clicking against the floor as she stepped in. So this is where you've been hiding. Heard you found yourself a new benefactor. I stood up slowly, my pulse hammering in my ears. What are you doing here? My words came out colder than I intended, but I didn't care. Dorian smirked, leaning against the doorframe as if he owned the room. Guess you didn't need me after all, he drawled. Always knew you'd land on your feet, or your knees. My face burned, not from embarrassment this time, but from fury. You don't get to talk about my mother like this. Celeste tilted her head, her eyes glinting with the kind of judgment only the wealthy seem to perfect. We're just surprised, dear. No one gives that kind of money without expecting something. I knew exactly what she was insinuating. My nails dug into my palms. Dorian chimed in, his voice mocking. You think Ben Miller just handed over $150,000 out of the goodness of his heart? Come on, Rowella. You've always been naive, but this is impressive. I felt my hands shaking, but I refused to back down. Not everyone measures kindness in dollars and humiliation like you do, I said, my voice low but steady. Dorian laughed, a hollow sound that made my skin crawl. You think you're better than us? You're just charity with a new bow on it. My jaw tightened. If that's what it takes to save my mom, I'll wear the bow proudly. That shut him up for a moment, but Celeste wasn't finished. She stepped closer, her perfume cloying, suffocating. You'll regret taking his money. People like you always do. Her words dripped like poison, designed to stick and fester. The room grew louder as voices overlapped, Dorian trying to bait me, Celeste's barbed comments slicing at my composure. A nurse rushed in, startled by the raised voices. "This is a hospital," she said firmly. "You need to leave." Celeste didn't flinch. "We're family." "No," I said, finally letting the words settle like stones in the air. "You're not." That was when security appeared. Two men in dark uniforms with calm but unyielding expressions. They positioned themselves between me and the Callahans. "Ma'am, sir," one said, his voice even. "You're going to need to leave." Celeste's glare could have frozen fire. She leaned in close enough for only me to hear and hissed, "This isn't over. You'll wish you'd stayed in your place." I didn't respond. I couldn't. My body was trembling too hard, not from fear, but from the flood of rage and grief that had been building for days. They were escorted out, Dorian tossing me one last sneer before disappearing down the hallway. When the door finally shut, silence filled the room again. But her words lingered like poison, echoing in my head. Deep down, though, I knew this wasn't about money. It was about control. And I'd just slipped out of their grasp. But slipping free of them didn't mean I was free of myself. And that night, the weight of it all came crashing down. By the time I got home, it was past 9. My apartment smelled faintly of takeout I hadn't finished 2 nights ago, and the pile of laundry in the corner seemed bigger than I remembered. The stack of bills on the counter mocked me with their silent, unopened threats. I kicked off my shoes and dropped my bag on the floor, not even bothering to hang up my coat. My body felt like it didn't belong to me anymore, just an empty shell moving through a space that hadn't felt like home in a long time. I collapsed onto the couch, staring at the cracked paint on the ceiling. My chest felt tight, like I'd been holding my breath for days. "I saved my mom," I whispered to no one. "But at what cost? Who am I now?" The words sounded hollow even to my own ears. It was quiet except for the hum of the fridge and the occasional car passing by outside. That silence pressed in on me, louder than any shouting match could be. I couldn't stop replaying the confrontation at the hospital. Every word Dorian had thrown at me burned in my brain. "You're just charity with a bow on it." At first I'd pushed it down, convincing myself I was stronger than their cruelty. But sitting there, alone in my apartment, those words started to feel like the truth. I blamed myself for everything. For kneeling in front of them like a fool. For letting the Callahans strip away every shred of dignity I had left. For needing Ben's help in the first place. I hated that I couldn't do it on my own. My fingers dug into the couch cushion as if I could squeeze the shame out of myself. I could still see Dorian's smirk, still hear his mother's voice dripping with contempt. I almost believed them, that I was small, replaceable, dependent. The pressure inside me finally snapped. I grabbed a pillow and buried my face in it, screaming until my throat was raw. When I couldn't scream anymore, I just cried, quiet, shaking sobs that soaked the fabric until it was damp against my skin. At some point, I pulled myself up and stumbled to the coffee table. My sketchbook was still there, untouched for weeks. I hesitated before opening it, almost afraid of what it would feel like to see my dreams staring back at me. I flipped through the pages, running my fingers over the sketches of gowns I once believed I'd create. Elegant lines, bold patterns, designs that felt like pieces of my soul. They'd been my escape, my purpose. But now they looked like fantasies from a life I didn't deserve anymore. Maybe they were right, I thought bitterly. Maybe I was only meant to survive, not create. The thought gutted me. The ringing of my phone startled me. I jumped, wiping at my face with the sleeve of my sweater before glancing at the screen. Past midnight. An unfamiliar number. I almost ignored it, assuming it was some spam caller, but something in me reached for the phone anyway. Hello? My voice cracked. Rowella? A calm, steady male voice. Yes. Who's this? This is Benjamin Miller, Jeanette's grandson. I sat up, my back going rigid. Is everything okay? Did something happen to Jeanette? No, he said quickly. She's fine. I know it's late, but I couldn't sleep. I've been thinking, we need to talk. In person. I blinked, trying to process his words. About what? The money? No, he said firmly. About what comes next for you. You're more than someone drowning in debt, Rowella. Let me prove it. I froze, unsure how to respond. No one had ever spoken to me like that before. Like I was more than my failures, more than the mess I'd been living in. I don't know what to say, I admitted, my voice trembling. You don't have to say anything right now, Ben replied. Just think about meeting me. I promise it's worth your time. When the call ended, I just sat there, staring at the phone like it might explain what had just happened. I looked back at my sketchbook. This time, I didn't see failure in those drawings. I saw possibility. I set it down on the table, not as a reminder of everything I'd lost, but as a promise to myself that maybe, just maybe, I hadn't been saved only to survive. Maybe this is my chance to start living, I whispered. I didn't know what Ben really wanted, but for the first time, I wanted to find out. And the next day, I walked into a cafe downtown, not knowing this meeting would change everything I thought I knew about my future. I don't think I'd ever been that aware of my own footsteps. Each one felt loud against the quiet morning streets, like the city could hear how nervous I was. The cafe wasn't far from my apartment, but it felt like I was walking into an interview that could change the rest of my life. My best blouse clung to my back under my coat, partly from the chill and partly from nerves. I clutched my sketchbook like it was armor, my only proof that I still had something to offer. This isn't just coffee, I told myself as I approached the door. This is a turning point. And yet, I had no idea what kind of turn I was about to take. Ben was already there when I walked in, sitting in a quiet corner near the big window. He waved, and I noticed how different he looked in daylight. Last time, over the phone, his voice had been calm, measured. Now, in person, there was something grounded about him. Casual clothes, but the kind of presence that made people instinctively listen. He stood when I reached the table, shaking my hand with a warmth that didn't feel rehearsed. Rowella, he said with a small smile. Thanks for coming. Of course, I replied, slipping into the seat across from him. My hands gripped my coffee cup tightly as soon as it arrived, grateful for something to do with them. We talked lightly at first. My mom's recovery, how she was responding to treatment. He asked about the scarf I wore, and I caught myself smiling when I told him it had been my mother's. But Ben didn't linger on small talk for long. I've been thinking about you, he said, leaning forward, his voice low but steady. My heart skipped. About me? He nodded. About your designs. About what's keeping you stuck. You're talented, Rowella. I can see that. But talent like yours doesn't mean much if it's buried under survival. Before I could respond, he reached into his leather bag and pulled out a folder. He slid it across the table. Inside were charts, articles, and a handful of neatly printed pages. Des Moines has a gap in the market, he explained. Independent bridal studios. The big chains are soulless, and the boutiques are overpriced. You could fill that gap. I'll invest. No debt. You'd own it outright. I blinked at him, stunned. Why me? You don't even know me. He met my gaze without flinching. I know kindness when I see it. I know resilience. And I know wasted potential when I see it too. You've been through hell, and you're still standing. That tells me everything I need to know. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to soak up every word like it was oxygen. But part of me couldn't. I wrapped my fingers tighter around my cup, trying to steady myself. This is a lot, I said quietly. I don't know what to say. Say yes, Ben replied, smiling just slightly. Say you're ready to stop surviving and start building. Just as a flicker of hope started to spark in me, his tone shifted. But I need you to understand something. I don't just invest in businesses. I invest in people. That means trust. Real trust. A knot formed in my stomach. What exactly are you asking for? He leaned back, his expression unreadable. Time. Let me mentor you. Let me be part of this journey. It's more than money, Rowella. It's about rewriting your story. Together. My pulse quickened. Part of me was flattered, even touched. No one had ever seen me like this before, like I wasn't just a collection of my mistakes. But another part of me was wary. What did together really mean? I closed the folder, resting my hand on top of it. I need to think, I said finally. Of course, Ben replied, as if he'd expected that. He slid a simple business card toward me. But don't take too long. Opportunities don't wait forever. When I stepped back out into the cold, my sketchbook felt heavier than ever. He was offering me the life I'd dreamed of, my own studio, my work finally brought to life. But at what cost? As I walked home, his words echoed in my head. If I said yes, I thought, I wouldn't just be building a studio, I'd be handing someone else the blueprint to my life. But before I could decide, the Callahans made their move, and this time they weren't just after my dignity. It was a Wednesday evening when I found myself alone at the co-working studio Ben had helped me get access to. It wasn't much, a shared space with a few drafting tables and an old sewing machine, but it felt like mine. For the first time in months, my hands moved with purpose, sketching silhouettes that might someday become real gowns. I could almost see them on women who, like me, needed something to make them feel whole again. The pencil glided across the paper as I imagined the studio Ben had described, sunlight filtering through big windows, brides leaving with dresses that weren't just fabric, but armor for the battles they'd face in their own lives. For a brief moment, I let myself believe that I was building something more than a dream. The ringing of my phone shattered that illusion. It was one of the suppliers I'd reached out to earlier in the week. Finally, I thought, maybe someone willing to work with me. Hello, this is Rowella, I answered, trying to mask the exhaustion in my voice with professionalism. The voice on the other end was hesitant. Ms. Callahan? The name made my stomach twist. No, I corrected quickly. It's Rowella, and I'm not— I'm sorry, he interrupted, flustered. But we won't be able to move forward with you. We don't want to get involved in, well, that situation. My grip on the phone tightened. What situation? A pause. Then a muttered, I think you know, before the line went dead. I sat there staring at the phone like it had betrayed me. My heart began to race. It didn't take long to find out what he meant. Scrolling through my phone, I saw it. A fake press release circulating on local community boards and business forums. My name in bold letters. A grotesque lie laid out in detail. Beware this designer, it read. She takes deposits and vanishes. Ask around before you get scammed. The words felt like punches, each one hitting harder than the last. And at the bottom, in bold, was the final blow. Don't say we didn't warn you. My fingers went numb, the phone nearly slipping from my hand. It was them. It had to be. This was how the Callahans operated. Not with open confrontation, but with whispers designed to rot you from the inside out. They'd done it to others before. Destroying reputations was their sport. their way of ensuring no one dared to climb out of the hole they'd thrown them into. I dialed Ben's number before I even realized what I was doing. He picked up on the third ring. "Rowella?" "They're trying to destroy me," I said, my voice trembling despite my best effort to steady it. "There's fake press about me online. People are pulling out before we've even started." There was silence on the other end. Too much silence. "Ben," I pressed, "please tell me we can fix this." Finally, he spoke. "Rowella, maybe we should slow things down until this clears." His words cut deeper than the lies ever could. "Slow down?" I repeated, incredulous. "So they win? That's what you're saying?" "No," he said quickly. "I'm saying you need to protect yourself. Let me handle this." But his hesitation had already told me what I needed to know. This wasn't just about me. An hour later, my worst fear was confirmed. A friend who moved in Ben's business circles called me, her voice low and urgent. "You didn't hear this from me," she began, "but the posts, they didn't just come from some anonymous troll. They were traced back to someone tied to Ben's network, someone close to the Callahans." The room tilted. My knees threatened to give out. Had I walked out of one gilded cage only to step into another? I looked around at the scattered sketches on my desk. The designs that had given me hope now felt like taunts, reminders of a future that seemed to slip further away with every passing hour. But beneath the fear, beneath the humiliation, something else began to simmer. A quiet, burning anger. If they thought I'd crawl back and beg, they didn't know me at all. Not anymore. The next morning I showed up at the Callahans' mansion, not to plead this time, but to end their games. The driveway was packed with gleaming luxury cars, the kind that screamed old money and status. The Callahans were hosting one of their famous charity brunches, a gathering that was more about flaunting than giving. Perfect. If I wanted the truth to sting, I needed an audience. I walked up the marble steps like I owned them, my heels steady despite the knot in my stomach. The last time I'd been in this house, I left drenched in rain and humiliation. But that woman, the one who begged for scraps, wasn't here today. Today, I was here for blood. Guests in designer dresses and tailored suits turned to look as I walked in, whispers trailing me like shadows. I didn't avoid their stares. I wanted them to see me, to really see me. Tyler's mother, Celeste, spotted me first. She stood near the grand piano, a champagne flute in hand, her pearls gleaming as much as her false smile. "Well," she drawled, loud enough for the room to hear, "I assume you're here to apologize for your little outburst online." The nerve. I walked up to her slowly, each step deliberate. "Actually," I said, placing a manila folder on the nearest table, "I'm here to return something that belongs to you." Her brow arched. "And what would that be?" "Your shame," I replied. That wiped the smirk off her face. Tyler appeared then, his hand casually resting in his pocket like he hadn't tried to ruin me. "You must be joking," he said, his voice dripping with that smugness that used to make me shrink. "Do you even know what kind of room you've just walked into?" I turned to face him fully. "Do you know what kind of room you've built this house on? Lies, smears, destruction? I hope you're proud." The crowd murmured, sensing the shift. Tyler stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Careful, Rowella. You wouldn't want to embarrass yourself more than you already have." "Embarrass myself?" I raised my voice just enough to carry across the room. "Or are you worried I might tell them how you paid people to post false accusations about me? Should I?" The silence that followed was thick enough to choke on. Celeste sputtered, "This is absurd. You have no proof." "Don't I?" I pulled out my phone, unlocked it, and pressed play. Ben's contact's voice filled the room, echoing through the mansion. "She's just a seamstress. Crush her now, and she'll disappear." Gasps. Whispers. All eyes darted between the Callahans and me. Tyler lunged for the phone, his mask cracking. "Turn that off!" I stepped back, holding it out of reach. "Touch me, and I'll post it everywhere before lunch is over. Every donor in this room will know exactly who they're really supporting." It was Celeste who broke first, her hand trembling as she reached for her champagne. You wouldn't dare." "Oh, I already have," I said, keeping my voice calm, almost casual. "That recording, it's been sent to a handful of very influential people here. I just wanted to give you the courtesy of hearing it first." The whispers grew louder, like a rising tide. People were pulling out their phones, already texting, already leaving. I leaned in close enough for only Celeste and Tyler to hear. "Your reputation was built on intimidation and lies. Let's see how long it stands now that everyone knows the truth." Then I stepped back, pocketed my phone, and turned to leave. As I walked out, I didn't look back. I didn't need to. The room was in chaos, donors whispering, staff looking lost, and the Callahans scrambling to do damage control. For the first time, I didn't feel small in their world. I had burned their stage and walked off on my own terms. But once the fire dies down, you're left with ashes. And I had to decide what to build from them. In the weeks after that day at the mansion, the whispers about me changed. For once, they weren't about my supposed desperation or the lies the Callahans had spread. They were about the recording. The fallout was bigger than I'd even anticipated. They lost several key donors. Tyler issued some weak, half-hearted statement about miscommunications and false narratives, but it only made them look worse. They had spent so long crafting an untouchable image that when it cracked, people were eager to watch the pieces fall. And yet, it didn't feel like revenge. It wasn't some wild rush or smug victory. It felt quieter than that, cleaner. It was justice, I told myself one evening while staring at the rain-streaked window of my apartment. Justice doesn't roar. It exhales. 6 weeks later, I stood in a small, bright studio space in downtown Des Moines, keys jingling nervously in my hand. My bridal studio. My own. The room was modest, but the sunlight poured through the tall windows like it had been waiting for me. The walls were freshly painted a soft cream. I'd chosen it intentionally. I wanted my brides to feel like they were stepping into possibility, not just another store. My sketches, once confined to the worn pages of my old book, were now pinned proudly on a corkboard. Every time I looked at them, I felt that same cautious hum of hope I hadn't felt in years. Ben kept his word. He invested, fully. No debts, no endless strings of fine print to hold over me. We signed the papers in a coffee shop, and when I looked at his signature next to mine, I knew I wasn't just signing a business deal. I was signing a promise to myself. I'd named it CF Couture. Callahan Free Couture. A jab, yes, but more than that. A declaration. This wasn't about proving my worth to them anymore. It was about building something for me, and for the women who would walk through these doors needing to feel beautiful again. I was rearranging bolts of fabric when I heard the door creak open. "Come in," I called, expecting a supplier or a curious neighbor. But there she was, Jeanette, the woman from that rainy bus stop. She looked smaller somehow, but stronger too, her back straight, her steps steady. And next to her was Ben, holding a paper bag that smelled like fresh muffins. "I hope we're not interrupting," she said softly. "Never," I replied, already walking toward her. I hugged her before I even thought about it. "I've been meaning to call you. I didn't know if you were—" I trailed off. "Still kicking?" "Oh, honey, it'll take more than life to get rid of me," she said with a wink that made me laugh for the first time that day. She reached into her bag and pulled out something carefully folded, the knitted scarf I had given her that night. Cleaned, pressed, neatly folded as though it were priceless. "You gave me dignity when I had none," she said, pressing it into my hands. "Keep this. as a reminder of what you gave others when you felt you had nothing left. The room blurred for a moment as my eyes filled. I clutched that scarf, and suddenly I was back in the rain. Small, soaked, broken. That girl had no idea she'd make it here, but I did, and I was proud of her. "I don't know what to say," I whispered. "Say you'll keep going," Jeanette said. "Say you'll remember what you're capable of." I nodded. Later that week, as I adjusted the lace on a gown in the display window, I watched my very first bride-to-be walk in. She was shy, fiddling with her ring nervously, her eyes darting around the room. But I knew that look. She was hoping this was the place where she'd feel whole, even if just for a day. For the first time in a long time, I thought as I greeted her with a smile, I wasn't surviving, I was thriving. And it all started with one rainy night and a choice to keep walking. I may never get an apology from the Callahans, but I no longer need one.